Welcome everybody to episode, I can't believe, number 19. We're almost up to number 20. This is freaking nuts. For those of you who are new, we started this after the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, when Whiskey Week was canceled in March. It was a big week of events here in Chicago, and it was canceled. And rather than just to drink ourselves to death with our depression, Eric and I decided to start this where about every 2 weeks, we interview another professional from the whiskey industry. Now, Mr. Bloom is grinning when I say professional from the whiskey industry, because officially we've called these interviews with the pros. I don't know if Michael, if you've made it, have you made a dime yet off of any of this?
No, I haven't.
No, okay. So you haven't made a dime yet. Okay, so I don't know. The official term of professional probably has to do something with making money off of this. But given the level of contacts that you've made in the industry and the people who have been paying attention to you, I'm putting you in the pro category. So welcome and thank you.
Thanks for inviting me to be part of this on this side of the mute button.
Very, very good. So what's interesting here is that most of us know Michael. We've known Michael for a very long time. And Michael, if I remember correctly, and we're not, I'm not asking you the normal questions that I asked from the very beginning, but you know, if I remember correctly, did this 50-state blend project, did it really start with bar and bat mitzvahs?
Actually, good memory. Back in 2018 is when it really took off, and the first bat mitzvah blend I did was in 2019. So I'd been playing with flavors, whiskey and food predominantly for a long time, and then blending just became a passion, thinking about how I might mark events by blending custom whiskey that used geography. And the bat mitzvah blend that you remember is my younger daughter was bat mitzvahed in August of 19, and she had a whiskey blend. It's not what's in my glass, but it's right here. Some of it's right here. Lena's bat mitzvah blend, not for her to drink, for until 2021. I mean, until she turns 21, I have some for her. But it was all 14 states and 7 countries she visited by that time of her life.
Great idea.
And so that was already an expression of, ooh, I'm collecting whiskeys and spirits that are from geographic places I'd either visited or were meaningful to me. And that kind of bloomed into what else could I do? Because this bottle already had 28 separate ingredients in it.
Wow.
So I wasn't afraid to play with something complicated. And the way that this turned out was maybe fortuitous and maybe something to do with being careful. Kind of an encouragement that I could do something even bigger.
Got it. So many of us have samples. What do you have there, Eric?
I was going to say, I have the complement to that. I have the Juliet Alexis bat mitzvah bottling.
Very nice.
A bunch of people tried at the synagogue.
Right, I remember. And is that again from the states that that Juliet's been to?
Yep. So it's barrel aged from northern, central, and southern California, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana, and Florida.
Got it. Got it. That's amazing. So what I have in front of me, and I know that many people have them also in front of them. I have single malt. Okay, the blend of single malts. Okay, and I have blend number 8.
Yes.
Okay, so if I am correct, single malt, these are all American single malt whiskeys, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, how many states?
There are 17 different single malts in that blend, and I believe that they are from 16 different states because I have 2 from California. Okay. I may be wrong there. Not everybody has that single malt one. There was less than a liter that I blended of that. So if you got to me early, you got one of those. But the single malt blend that I did first, I did one with 12 that was one of Mr. Nolan's favorites that I had done to date. And Michael Nolan is always one of those people that if I can blend something I like and he also likes it, then I know I got something really right. So I decided on Thanksgiving to do the 17 single malts that I had on hand. Now, the 50 state blend is actually, I should probably define what that is. It's for those who don't know. So 50 state blend was the idea of collecting and then blending a single whiskey that was pulled from whiskeys distilled in all 50 states plus DC. So 51 ingredients. Of those 51 ingredients, 14 of those original ingredients were single malts. And like a lot of you, I love single malt for lots of reasons. The pot still distillation, as I actually learned, like you did on this call from somebody else, gives a great mouthfeel. And I love that about single malts. I also love how much variety there is in that category. So when collecting the whiskeys for this project, I actually chose single malts if I could find a reputable one to actually buy and put into the blend. And since that time, I added 5 different single malts to my collection, and that's what you have in the blend. If you want to taste it, we can do that.
Yeah, no, it's no, I think it's wonderful. I love the nose on it. As a matter of fact, you know, when we open it up for comments later, I'm going to ask people to give whatever opinions they have or thoughts on these, you know, the tasting notes that they're getting, because I want to make sure, I don't want to do that now because I want us to get through a lot of the questions. I know that a lot of us also received blend number 8. Can you tell us what blend number 8 is?
So each blend that I've done, I've called a different draft. And if you are curious about going in deep to that, go to 50stateblend.com, which is a website I created to kind of catalog what I'm doing. And yes, Eric helped me technologically with that as well. I have this group to thank for a lot, by the way, including encouraging me to continue this passion. But draft number 8 is also nicknamed Rye-centric. And why that is that there are also about 15 ryes in the 51 ingredients. But instead of using things that in the same proportion every draft, I actually play with the proportions to see what I can create with the same ingredients. With only a couple exceptions, I'm playing with the same 51 bottles as I started with. I ran out of a couple and substituted in. But so draft 8 is rye forward in a 5-liter draft. So that, and that's how much I make with that bottle up there. I mean, that barrel up at the top. With a 5-liter draft, the amount I'll put in of any one spirit can vary in this draft, for instance, from 40 milliliters of the least thing up to 230, 240 milliliters of the most ingredient.
And what are you blending these in?
So I actually use this graduated cylinder and a nice big glass pitcher. And I pour, I measure things out. I can't go any smaller than 20 milliliters in this because that's the first marking. And I actually pour it into the glass pitcher from there. You'll notice that on the blends page of the website, there's some pictures of what my process looks like.
So none of these are going into any type of like small oak cask or anything, because, you know, we see those kits that people are selling online for doing that by themselves. Is that part of your process at all?
Right. So I mentioned that there's that barrel up there. As soon as I fill the glass pitcher, it goes right into that barrel. And usually I will barrel age my blends starting with draft 4 for 3 or 4 weeks before bottling them. That barrel started out as a new toasted oak barrel. And I source my barrels like you guys can from redheadbarrels.com. They're out of Texas. I found that their products are really, really reliable. Eric can tell you stories about products from somewhere else. So yeah. And so like many of you, I go to World of Whiskey as often as I can. By the way, I don't know if any of you realize this. I did when Jill invited me. The temporary date that they gave back in April or May, thinking that COVID would blow over, would have been December 10th.
Right. So and actually Michael Applebaum, he sent me an email today, a note today, asking if maybe we should have a moment of silence for the fact that we would have had that this was the rescheduled World of Whiskey. So,
Right. So instead you got
let's do a 5-second moment of silence. There, we can all cry it out later. Okay, very good. So thank you, Michael and Michael, for both reminding me of that. All right, so we were talking, okay, World of Whiskeys, we're talking about the barrel that you use. So how many of those barrels do you have?
I have 4 active barrels, one that retired. So I have a 1 liter, a 2 liter, a 3 liter, and a 5 liter. So I guess I only have 3 that are currently active.
Okay.
I also use each one for a different thing. So I love sherried Islay whiskeys, and so one is used just to blend those. And
so you're doing some things that are not United States now.
Yeah, I actually started that way. There's Mordecai's Nightcap and Blasphemy in a Good Way. Those are the 2 names. Blasphemy is a Cahuilla-based blend, and Mordecai's Nightcap was blended with Lagavulin 8.
Wow.
So they're both really, I'm happy to share those with people who are interested.
Okay, well, you all, everybody on Facebook knows Michael, and if you don't have his contact from Facebook, just email me or Eric, and we'll help you get into that. So I have a few questions, some very specific questions about your process here. Every once in a while, do you taste a whiskey that is so darn good that you don't want to put it in the blend?
Oh gosh, here's the real answer to that. Nothing's too good to put in a blend, and some people might think that I'm a fool for blending with distillery only independent bottle rarities, but those are exactly the whiskeys that made me fall in love with whiskeys from far off states and non-Kentucky, non-Tennessee whiskeys. So if I left them out of this blend, I would be foolish.
Okay, because I think I saw even a single cask nation. Didn't I see like a single cask nation? Was it a Westland in there?
Yeah, the first single cask nation I ever bought was their Westland 2-year-old, and I have used up my first bottle of that thanks to Jonathan Markowitz, another friend from JRC.
I was surprised. I got to tell you, I was surprised to see that in there because, those bottles are special, but you already answered the question. If it's special and you want to make a special blend,
then use the stuff really, this is all about demystifying whiskey for me. I'm an enthusiast just like all of you guys, and I love sharing what I've got. And one of the ways to share that is to put a little bit of your own collection in a bottle, but how is that? So another way of doing it is by creating something with it. And yeah, we know about infinity bottles that are sometimes haphazardly put together, sometimes really carefully put together. This is just that taken 2 or 3 more steps for me. And some of the other bottles, by the way, Gil, that are really special are things like the Binney Select Cody Road bourbon that's from Mississippi Road Distillery. Great. And Nelson's Greenbrier, the makers of Belle Mead that actually sourced that, but in Tennessee, but they actually released their own, and it wasn't really an accident that I ended up traveling to Arkansas and Nashville last December because I needed that bottle with my whole family. But so the Rocktown from Arkansas, which you can actually get at Binny's now, it's really good.
Yeah.
And the Greenbrier from Tennessee are other examples of whiskeys that are tricky to get, but wonderful to share.
So I'm glad you mentioned Tennessee because part of this project to me seems overwhelming. When we have states like Kentucky and Tennessee that have so many good expressions coming out of them, how do you decide what's going to make it into your bottle?
I went small, and I went a direction to try to introduce something new to people. So it could have been, let me just use this really easy to access, relatively inexpensive baseline core Kentucky whiskey and then just decorate it with some other 50 states, right? I had no interest in doing that. So what I wanted to do is really find something smaller and feature that so that honestly, the Kentucky and Tennessee didn't take over the story or the blend. So Kentucky is New Riff Rye. Not all that unusual, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of you have had it. Sure. And then the Nelson's Greenbrier from Tennessee was that distillery only bottle that they had.
Got it. So one other thing that surprised me when I looked at your website, And by the way, if those of you who are on this call, if you haven't gone to Michael's website yet, 50 State Blend, you've got to go. It is amazing. And one of my favorite page there is the page that shows each of the bottles. Okay, because that tells me, what's gone in here. And one thing that surprised me on there. So, as you know, sometimes one particular bottle can overwhelm the tastes of others. And Sandra, who's on this call, and Lynn and a few others will remember from our Binny's tasting 6 months ago that we actually had Colkegan. Okay, remember the New Mexican single malt that was, and Todd's also shaking his head, that was smoked with mesquite. And it essentially was like brisket whiskey. It was amazing, right? So it was such a strong flavor. Can you tell us a little bit about how you make sure that what goes in here isn't going to be overwhelmed by such strong flavors?
I was honestly afraid of that too when I blended my first blend of 50 State Blend. And I actually used 10 milliliters of all 51 ingredients across the board to see what would happen, to see how much work am I going to have to do to make this drinkable, because those, at least 6 actually of the whiskeys in this blend are smoked in some kind of way. Whiskey Del Bac from Arizona, also mesquite. Balcones also had some smoke in it. So I was like, are they going to be weird? Are they going to be odd? And now forget for a moment that I love weird and odd in the first place. So if I made it that way, I might like it. Maybe other people wouldn't.
Right.
So what ended up happening is I would say that if anything, those ingredients almost got lost, just like the most gentle ingredient in the bunch would get lost, like the whiskey from Hawaii or Idaho, which are really light whiskeys. And so I actually took steps afterwards to use them more like an accent wall in your house, where you don't really want that bright gold everywhere, but you might be okay with it in one place. And I honestly think that those kind of really stand out, even pungent ingredients do a really good job of interrupting what otherwise might be an unremarkable experience. And so the challenge is to figure out how to make something that's maybe a tenth those ingredients actually work. And I'm curious, now that some of you have a sample in your hand, when we get into comments, what you think, because the rye centric draft 8 is much less single malt, so much less smoke than any of the other blends I did, because most of those smoke flavors tend to come with the Colkegans and the Balcones and stuff, which are all single malts.
Right. That makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about Dave Sweet. Okay. So Dave Sweet, you all may recall that we interviewed Dave months ago. Dave, Barrel and Bottle, just to remind you, he's the guy who has the opaque bottles, but he manages to find some very unique barrels from distillers around the country. I know that he likes your stuff, okay, and that he's interested in possibly working with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
So briefly, it will take some time, and Dave and I have some partnerships to pull off with the distilleries that we want to work with. But yes, Dave and I are working on a partnership so that Barrel and Bottle can bring you 50 State Blend to buy on the market.
You see, now that's great, because there's such a limited supply of this stuff. Obviously, you're working out of your basement there. You can only spend so much money, bringing these things together. That's wonderful. So no, I'm glad to hear it, because I remember that when you and I were at the awards together, when you and I were judging the awards together, that it was, Dave announced it. He introduced you. That must have been a big deal for you.
It was. I had just actually been asking Monique Houston, another guest on this on this podcast or on this program, why nobody had actually done the kind of thing I was playing with before. And her answer, I mean, this was minutes before Dave announced and introduced me, because I didn't know that was happening. And she said, because it's ridiculously difficult. And I'm like, okay. Now, also, Paul Haletko, also from Few, we've also talked to him. He also said, yes, I'll talk to you, Michael, about your idea. This was back in 2018 when the government shut down and I had some time to talk to people like Paul. He said, I would never be part of a big blend like that. And I'm not interested at all, and there's no market for it. I said, great, will you tell me all the reasons why? And so he met with me anyway.
That's great. That's great.
And a lot of it is about risk and about why sell something blended when you can't control what the other ingredients are in there? And do you really want to put your name on it? And by the way, Gil, you have a bottle that Paul did work with.
Right. I mean, you all may recall that. So we've had Paul. This is the Four Kings. Okay, one of the Four Kings expressions. And you all may recall that the Four Kings started when a bunch of guys were drunk at Delilah's one night. Okay, it was after Whiskey Fest, and Brett Pontani told us this, that Paul Hletko was there, and a few, and Journeyman Welter was there from Journeyman, Corsair was there, and they were all getting together, and they were at Delilah's, and they were joking around. They said, we should get together and do our own blend. And Brett said to them, if you do that, I will buy every single barrel. And that's how it started. So the Four Kings started when they were making a joke. And it's funny you mentioned Hletko, because he actually said that it was a big pain in the ass for him.
Right. And Paul is a really great, I mean, everybody who knows him knows that he's a really shrewd, very thoughtful business person. And I'm coming at this from a passion place. So
yeah, that's big difference.
To kind of build all those relationships with all those distilleries that would need to say, yeah, we'll play. Yeah, because I'm not trying to sell hundreds or thousands of cases of whiskey a month. But it's interesting. So this is really kind of a testament to the fact that when you're an enthusiast and you want to kind of do something, that there are some niches where nobody else in the industry is actually doing it. Sometimes because it's a pain, other times because industry people don't always think like many of us, where we're like, I want the new thing, I want the different thing, I don't want the comfort thing, right? We all have our comfort whiskeys, but I think a lot of us, when we go to a festival, are like, I want to try something with a great story that I haven't had before, that's good quality, that I want to share with other people.
Right.
And to me, if this project can help open people's eyes to more single malts in the United States, or more whiskeys from craft distilleries in the US, then it's kind of serving like a Whiskey Fest or a World of Whiskey does on a small scale.
Right.
And that's why the website does what it does, because I want each one of the creators of these awesome products to get some love from people who discover them because they've just had a tiny piece of that in something I made.
I like that you're putting it that way, because one of the challenges that Eric and I have when we're looking for people to interview here, and I actually see somebody who's on my list. Ari, you don't know that you're on my list, but I'm going to be contacting you about being interviewed here. The guy, Ari Clafter there from Thornton River Distillery. But Ari was also one of the judges at this consumer thing. But one of the issues that I have here with this is that, and one of the challenges I had with inviting you for this tonight is that I want people to be able to taste the products of the people whom we are interviewing. Okay. I mean, it's one thing to interview from Binny's, or, people who are in the industry who are bottling things, but it's another thing to actually talk to people who are making something. If you can't taste it, it takes away a little bit from the experience. So that's always a challenge for me here, especially also with some of the smaller distilleries, but we're going to have to just figure that out as we go forward. I'm going to open it up for questions soon. I just have like one other question here. Actually, I have a bunch of other questions, but one in particular. What did you find was your biggest challenge in putting together this 50-state blend?
So I mentioned the fact that barrels can be tricky. So I wanted to, if I put anything in a barrel, I didn't want that barrel to actually radically change what I put in a way that I couldn't correct. So that's kind of challenge fear. But you also mentioned another one, which is how do you take these really distinctive single malts that have a smoke characteristic and actually get them not to overpower? The other thing is that the minor distinctions, it's hard for me sometimes when I sip whiskey to really distinguish the difference between lemon peel and orange and tangerine. And, you know, you listen to some people like our friend Joshua that can explain whiskey with the most minute notes. And then you have other people that are, it's basically like they want a snickerdoodle as a whiskey. Like, I want vanilla and cinnamon and caramel. And it's like, no, I don't drink whiskey for snickerdoodle replacement. I drink whiskey for something complex. So one of the interesting things for me, and it's been a challenge because I got it right with draft 2, and then in draft 5, and I would even say in draft 8, it sometimes goes away. Again, I want to hear from you about what you think. But it's sometimes easy to take 51, and it seems like it's easy to take 51 ingredients and have it taste like just one. Now, some people might go, awesome, you did it. It's all blended and integrated really nicely. And I'm like, but is that what I want? Because I'm the Lagavulin drinker, right? I'm the Balcones drinker that's like, give me 5 things, give me a roller coaster. And so one of the things I'm finding, especially as I pivot from I'm making this to see if it's possible to I'm making this to make it a commercially viable product, is to figure out how to please my own interest in this weird wild ride of savory exotic and cast strength and stuff, but also please people who are not looking for that necessarily. And
well, you can't make everybody happy though.
No, so I'm making me happy, because if it doesn't move, I get to drink it, right? And if I'm happy, that's all fine. And hopefully some of you are also happy with it. I know if I give it away for free, more people are happy with it than
but you know, it's funny, you know, you may have noticed that at almost all the whiskey tastings that Brian Nagorski and I sit next to each other. And in addition to the fact that we're very good friends, do you know one of the reasons why Brian and I sit next to each other?
Because he doesn't like Pete.
Right, because he knows that if there's something he doesn't like, he knows that I will like it. Okay, and he knows that if I have something that's a little bit too fruity or too sweet, that he'll like it. Okay, so you know, you can't satisfy everybody, but somehow it all works out. Eric, do you have any particular questions for Mr. Bloom at this time?
Yeah, so just going into bottles and actually kind of the short-term, long-term goals is, you know, on the site you've already retired 2 bottles. How are you planning on? What are you going to plan to do with these bottles going forward? Are you going to replace them with identical bottles, or are you planning on changing up different distilleries over time and evolving your blends?
Both. Right now, I think that I filled in the gaps. It's hard to find all 51 states, by the way. But I filled in the gaps sometimes with the whiskey I could get, not the whiskey that was ideal. And sometimes the same distillery has a whiskey that might be a better fit. So I will switch up that. For instance, I love Journeyman's Last Feather Rye. It's in the blend that you're tasting tonight. But I also really like their single malt, and I'm likely to switch over to their single malt for future ones because it gives a different depth of character. Then there's the fact that whiskeys from states like South Carolina, I've already had a whiskey that's in my blend that is a closed distillery, right? So I'll be, and that was Crouch. So they closed in the summer. So I'll be looking for a new South Carolina whiskey. And I had one that was on my list, but is really, really hard to get. But I'll try harder to get that one. I do think that once this becomes a commercial endeavor, and imagining that I can get 51 different distilleries to say, yes, we'll play ball with you, that then it will be a different calculus about what is in there and what changes. I've imagined the fact that people would be clamoring to have their whiskey in there, and I could figure out what the next year's release might be based on that. That's a dream, right? But what's the reality here is that geography has determined like 51 states, and a lot of it is what can you get in Chicago, or who eventually, when this becomes commercial, will say, yes, we'll sell you some of our ingredients, not at the bottle on the liquor store shelf price, but at a discount. And we'll see how that works.
I'm glad you mentioned the cost of this, because I know that you've spent several $1,000s in this endeavor. I mean, you had to collect over 50 bottles. I mean, that's not cheap.
Right. And fortunately, I started with about 18 when I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And another, fortunately, is that Benny's is a great liquor store to have in your backyard. Also, Spirit Hub, some of you have heard me talk about them, spirithub.com. They're a Lincolnwood, Illinois whiskey delivery company, and their specialty is craft spirits from all over the country, almost only US, 1,300 different bottles.
Wow.
A good 16 of my bottles come from them, and I love working with them. And I was able to get bottles delivered to me for 35 to 50 bucks, not always the 60, 70, $80 bottles. So now that I'm able to do this as a test, I'd even worked with Delilah's. By the way, Delilah's was supposed to have a 50 state tasting back in March.
Oh.
And I'm like,
Oh.
really?
Oh, that hurts.
Can I bring a cask and have everybody pour just an ounce of things in? Yeah, but they didn't. But I had dreamed of lots of ways to do this less expensively for me. But ultimately, I think I'm really happy with what I've been able to do by this proof of concept. And I'm really excited that other people like you guys are excited that it exists.
Oh, no, that's great. So as I said, I've got a ton of other questions, but I'd like to open it up to other people here for questions, and then we can come back to me. If anybody has a question, we don't have a large group right now. Nolan, you almost always have a question or two. Yeah, you have anything in particular you'd like to ask your good friend, Mr. Bloom?
I really don't have any questions because we chat and he, any question inevitably he would answer anyway. But I just wanted to say one, and I think I've expressed this to you before. What you're doing is absolute magic to me. It's like I don't know, I can't conceptualize how you've done this. It's amazing. Many people here know me and know I'm really passionate and love whiskey, but I'm also kind of picky. I mean, there's whiskeys out there I just don't enjoy, and I make no bones about why I don't enjoy them. Michael, what you've done is just always blows me away. And I mean, even if it's not as good as the previous expression, it's still really interesting, really enjoyable. And I'm so grateful I can join you on this adventure. So
thank you.
Oh, that was very nice.
And the other comment is make sure when this goes hits retail, don't let Dave design the damn bottle, please.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things you've seen all the small bottles, but this is what the bottle looks like when it's on a full-size bottle. I think the label should be bigger. But one of the things you might not have noticed is that every single bottle that I've done is a different shape. And that's because my day job is as a sustainability guy with the federal government. And I love the fact that I can reuse bottles. So every single bottle on my shelf of 50 State Blend is actually a reuse of a bottle that is part of 50 State Blend.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's not going to work on the retail side,
No,
but I definitely
but for mine,
understand.
it can work.
Yeah, no, that's great. Paul, you usually have a question or two before we open it to everybody else.
Gil, I was going to piggyback on that. It would be a lot of fun, though, to see a lot of different shaped bottles out there.
It would drive Brett Pontani crazy. Okay?
Yes, it would. But
He would say no. He would say that is not going on my shelf. They are all either all looking the same or they're not on my shelf. That's what Brett would say.
Brett, at least it's not opaque.
I think it's the one thing that would annoy him more than an opaque bottle.
So if you're in sustainability, though, what it is, people can bring their used 50 State bottles back and then refill them. And in Belize, they do this with the beer, and you can tell how many times it's been used because they pull a little nib of the glass because they just keep reusing the bottles until they can't reuse them. So that would be fun. Yes, it would drive Brent Pontoni crazy. But
Yeah, it would. Yeah, that's it. And also, God knows what the regulations in Illinois would be for that.
Right, and just for those who aren't familiar, Brett is the main liquor buyer at Benny's, which is our big liquor store for those people who are not in Chicago.
And we've all been friends with him for years. So, Paul, do you have any questions for Mr. Bloom?
So first, a comment. Ironically, this is how Johnny Walker started. They would get the barrel, you'd walk in, and you'd get a pull from the barrel into your bottle. So We used to be quite sustainable when we did this hundreds of years ago, right? But on a more serious note, what is the role of terroir in the 50-state blend, and what's the most interesting or unique terroir that you've experienced with this project?
Okay, so awesome question. So I was interested in that too, and I will say that I notice much more sameness among the whiskeys that I source from the Northwest, but like the North Rockies, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, than I do elsewhere. So that's something I noticed. And I know Colorado, by the way, is working on having a Colorado whiskey terroir kind of thing happen, both because of altitude and other things. But the scientist in me, and I'm only a political scientist, but the scientist in me says that to really get at terroir in whiskey, I'd need to keep my types of whiskey more similar than I actually have in this experiment. So if I have a third bourbon, a third rye, and a third single malt, I'm not really doing a good job of that. So in single malt, I think you can tell more. And it's interesting because I have single malts for the whole West Coast, right? Now, so do you, Paul. So like California, Oregon, Washington, really great malts, very different from one another though, including Oregon to Washington, where I would have thought maybe there'd be some similarities. So again, I'm not looking at all of them, I'm just looking at a couple. But I think that's a project that others of us, I'll play with people who want to do that, but I think that's a great experiment to look for, is to look for terroir in American whiskey. And I think we'd find it if we just like took all ryes and looked at those, or bourbons.
Okay.
I guess
What other questions do we have?
If there's time.
Hmm?
I guess maybe one follow-up to that if there's time.
Sure.
So in terroir, we're talking a lot about generally the grains that go into it. A lot of places are focused on grains from a particular farm or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think that's where you would end up finding terroir, or do you think that there's another, anything else in play there? Where do you think terroir comes from? Sorry.
I think that's a brilliant question too. I have lots of thoughts on that, but one of the things that I didn't answer in your first question was, did any stand out in terms of terroir? I want to say an N in there. I don't know why. The one that does stand out is the Idaho whiskey from Warfield, which I actually brought to Brett's tasting so that Gil could taste it. The reason why I love that one, it actually tastes as if you can taste the Rocky Mountain spring water in it. It tastes so clear and fresh that the water used seems to like shine through. And that's not barley, right? So to me, and I know a lot of what made Kentucky famous for being the whiskey maker is water. I'm really curious about how water actually drives terroir. And I think that Michael Nolan probably has some ideas about that from Ireland too. So yeah, so I would say water as well as grain, and then the different practices that people are using in those different places.
Very good. Before we get to, I want to make sure that we get to people's comments on the blends that they're tasting, those who do have them. But are there any other specific questions for Michael before we go talk about what we're drinking tonight? Yes.
What would you say is the best mistake you've made in your experimentation?
Ooh, best mistake. I think my best mistake was not realizing until after I did it that when I took the time to rate all of the whiskeys on palate, nose, finish, and mouthfeel, that what I would end up with is something as huge and bold as draft number 2. I didn't realize that my weighting system had really made sure that the best would be the strongest, right? And I've since corrected for that. But if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have learned what the power inadvertently of that rating system could do. I love those kinds of flavors, so I actually really loved Draft 2. But yeah, so that's my favorite mistake.
Thank you.
That's a great question. So Sandra, you have a pretty good palate, and I think that were you one of the people who was able to get samples?
I did.
Oh,
So
okay.
it
All
was
right.
interesting. I didn't know before you mentioned it that this is rye forward, and I definitely taste that spiciness and that bite, which is, you know, what I love so much about rye. So that was right off the bat, but you know, not like the ryes on my shelf. So
And do you have any comment on the single malt blend?
I have 8.
Okay. Okay. So
That
you only
was
have 8.
single malt. Yeah,
Okay. All
I
right.
got there late.
Oh, you got there late. Got it. How about Lynn, Ralph? Lynn, did you get some cut? Were you able to get up there?
Yes, I did. I'm finding it very hard to taste both of these because the 17 malt is very elegant. What I'm finding interesting is its nose kind of is very similar from the time I opened it toward the beginning of this to now. But I'm finding that the heavy rye, the nose is different, that what's left now is sweeter. It's not quite as complex as it was at the beginning. I'm really seeing differences, but I find it very hard to taste the single malt, or not the single malt, the heavy single malt blend. Right after the heavy rye, because I really need to rinse my mouth. The rye is just overwhelming. I usually don't like sweetness in my whiskey, and there's a good bit in there.
Right.
I also like a really grassy, grab you by whatever rye, and this is definitely not a grassy, or if there were grassy ryes in there, they've disappeared. But I also found the viscosity between the two. I mean, the rye one's got legs like you wouldn't believe, and the malt basically nothing, but it's elegant. I like it. I didn't at first, but I really do now.
Yeah,
And
very nice.
I find it interesting that, I mean, Michael, how on earth did you, with such really different blends, how did you decide to come up with two that are just so different?
Almost intentionally, I did an earlier blend with that amped up the amount of single malt, and I was familiar with that character. And like I said at the top of the call, I knew that Michael Nolan loved the 12 single malt, so I'd always wanted to do another. And I had no intention of putting that in a barrel before I put it in a bottle. So I did that one 2 days after the rye. And I did the rye. Honestly, what I did with the rye is I backed down on all the single malt. So if you combined the 17 single malt with your rye, you'd end up with something a lot more like Draft 6 of my own, right? So I did them intentionally different, but and I love the fact that this group has the chance to sample those 17 ingredients on their own, and then something that has them in there, but with them just way equalizered out, where we don't have the vocals in the track that we're listening to, right?
Right. So who else here has them? Debbie Samuels, were you able to get samples? Debbie? Is she there?
I have number 8. I picked up the rye
Okay.
yesterday, and
Any particular comments for Michael?
just blown away. I'm a rye fan, I'd say, when I'm not drinking whiskey. I'm not as much a bourbon fan. I'm a rye, and it's just, I guess I'm not like Lynn. I don't like the grassy type of rye, and so this just really, it's way too drinkable. I mean, in a good way. It's a good thing that I only have that small bottle to drink, or it would be a very, very long evening. This would be something that I would,
Debbie, I just left for a minute to go to my closet where I have these. These are all little samples here that I have that Michael's given me over the last several months. It is dangerous. I totally agree.
But drinkable, not in a bad way, but in a really this is an amazing good way. And I don't quite have the right words for that, but yeah, it really stands out.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Debbie.
Uh,
It's
Paul,
okay, by the
no,
way.
Paul,
for-
you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you were saying.
We're just gonna say it's okay if somebody detects something that isn't their favorite. By the way.
Sure, of course. Paul, do you have any comment?
Yeah, I'm detecting some things that aren't entirely my favorite.
Okay, I'm shocked.
But I'm also detecting things that I really find interesting and I like too. The rye definitely feels like the rye forward feels like a full-blooded rye to me. And it has a certain young Willet character to it. Almost, it's pretty bold and pretty big. But I feel like I'm getting a significant like few rye thing going on with it too. I don't know if that's,
Yeah. How about the single malt? Did you were able to get did you get any of the single malt?
Single malt is complicated. I'm not sure how I feel. And,
Okay.
and part of that is for some reason, and I'm still researching and trying to figure out why, but I'm not the biggest fan of peated American single malt.
Okay. Well, and that's definitely a characteristic here. That's definitely here.
I love peated, Scotch and Islay whiskeys and everything like that. But the character just comes off completely different to me, especially as it opens up and oxidizes.
Okay.
So that's kind of one of the things that's dominant on the nose and on the initial palate of the single malt. It has opened up since it's been sitting in the glass and it's kind of evolving over time. And so I'm kind of relearning it now in the past 5 minutes or so. But that's kind of where I'm at this stage.
Okay.
I think that there's going to be some very interesting components inside of that single malt. I'm not sure if some of the things that are coming through for me are like what I love per se.
Got it.
That's what I'm spending time trying to figure out.
That's fine. Jay, did you get samples?
I did.
Okay.
I had both. And I am a lot less sophisticated than most of you when it comes to this. So I just know what I like and what I don't like. And I like both of them immensely. I like the 17 malt one was outstanding. And on your website, Mike, do you have a list of all the whiskeys that you bought?
I do. The 17 single malt, though, is an exception. You'll find a picture of, well, I have a photograph of all the bottles that are in that one, but I didn't post that on the 50 state blend because technically speaking, it isn't all 50 states.
Right.
So I can definitely share those with you. I love hearing these comments, by the way. This is really helpful to know, to also help me figure out what's next, right?
Right. Well, I'm trying to get through everybody here. Brian Nagorski also, Brian has a sample of each. Do you have any particular comments on the rye and on the single malt?
I haven't tried the rye yet. The single malt, I mean, it's a blend, so it's pretty smooth, and I'm actually surprised by it more from Michael, just of its, and obviously you can taste it, but it's got more of a finished taste to it, which is very nice, in the sense of it's like you've obviously you're trying to make up a taste and it's done very well.
Okay, very nice. Todd Coe, did you get any of these or not? Did you? No? Okay. Applebaum, did you get them? Okay, comments?
I got the rye. And I guess what you're expecting is what you taste normally in all ryes, but what I found that stood out is it's pretty balanced from front to end, and it kind of maintained a consistency that maybe I wasn't expecting, but which made it delicious and made it unique. So it didn't spike with a hotness anywhere. It just had that balance.
Very nice. Did I miss anybody? Actually, Bloom, you haven't given us your comments on these two yet, I don't think.
I think Ari got a chance to grab.
Did Ari get a chance to get these?
Yeah, I swung by last week. So right now,
I'm very nice.
Through the high rye blend and the single malt, and big fan of both. I really like with the rye. You can definitely tell it's a blend of different whiskey styles because there is a decent amount of like caramel in there, and also kind of very youthful oakiness, which like is really cool because that's craft spirits. That's like the state of American craft spirits right now. And I like how all those components with the spiciness of the rye make it balance out. But I'm really digging the single malt. I think one of my favorite styles of single malt is sort of like moderately peated, where you have like some unpeated malt and some peated. And what I love about this one is it's using these American single malts, some of which that smokiness isn't coming from peat, but from mesquite. I think you're using both Whiskey Del Bach and Cole Keegan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's two things that are mesquite smoked. So it's a very different type of smokiness, but in a very well balanced and delicate whiskey. I dig it.
Cool. Mr. Nolan, you've probably had more experience than any of us in tasting Michael Bloom's products. Do you have any particular comments on these two?
And I'll be honest with you, I have not had the opportunity to taste these two. And tonight, I've got a particular head thing, so I wasn't drinking.
Okay, that's fine. Did I get everybody who's had a sample of these?
I didn't.
Eric and also Malik and Bill are in a unique position because they don't have Draft 8 or single malt, but they do have many of the others. Because
as do I.
and so I'm curious, have you tasted any of those, Malik and Bill?
We tasted the apple pie, number three, and
number 5.
Number 5.
Which is, yeah, single malt one, but it's the 50 state single malt one.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of smoke. That's the one thing that I have discovered across all flavors of anything that is in a glass I don't like. So I drank that one. But I really enjoyed the apple pie, and we haven't opened the other ones, but maybe we will while you're still talking. But I liked that it felt really smooth and it felt like there was a lot happening. So I don't know that also that I've ever had blends before, to be perfectly honest. I feel
Malik, I like what you just said, Malik. I thought that you just said something that's actually very sophisticated. You said that there's a lot going on, okay? And those of us who've been drinking whiskey for a long time, do any of you remember, I think it was about at least 10 years ago, there was a bottle that was a blend of all 7 active Isla distilleries back then. I think it was called like Black Bottle or something like that, like over a decade ago. And I remember I bought a few bottles and I was sampling it with one of my friends, and he's been drinking whiskey for a long time, Malik. And one of the first things he said was when he tasted it, he was like, wow, there's a lot going on in that bottle. Like he could tell that, and it's like what we're seeing here with what Michael's putting together. It's like, how do you, combine different things to come up with one, very strong, particular product that's enjoyable to taste. So I like I respect your comment there. I like that a lot. That was a really good comment. Eric Leader, what are your thoughts on number 8 and the single malt blend?
So batch 8 is really good. I like the rye forward. It definitely, you definitely get the sweetness on the initial sip, but then you get the rye. It's definitely not as rye heavy as a regular rye, but it's still really nicely balanced. And I very much agree with what Lynn had said, which was also really surprising, is trying it after pouring it out of the bottle, and then I didn't touch it for most of the call and then went back to it, and it really tastes very different than it initially started with. So I still have a third of a bottle, so I'm going to have to try it again.
It's funny you mentioned that because I went to the components with the other bottles, and I'm actually tasting now. Let's see, Rye Patch whiskey from Nevada. That you gave me, which is just delicious stuff. But Eric, please give us your comments on the single malt blend.
Single malt was, especially initially, it was much on the hotter side, but it was still very light, and it was good. don't know. I need to taste it again. I finished it off, but there wasn't, I think, much very remarkable about it. It was nicely balanced, but there wasn't nothing special of note came across.
For me, on the single malt, I definitely tasted a little bit of peat or smoke. I definitely tasted a little bit of smoke. There was something going on there. There was also some sweetness. I definitely got the heat that you mentioned there, Eric. I also got some chocolate notes, and again, that might be just from the charring. I thought it was delicious, very drinkable. The rye definitely tasted like a rye to me. And I did get a little bit of the grassiness that Lynn mentioned that she didn't get. I did get a little bit of the grassiness. It was very clean, a little bit oily, which was nice. So I enjoyed them both very much. And believe it or not, people, it's 8 o'clock. I can't believe this. We could be going on for hours. So what I'd like to do right now is everybody, please unmute yourselves. If everybody could please unmute. If you are so inclined, make sure there's something in your glass, but it's not mandatory, of course, because we try to encourage responsibility. And everybody raise a glass and say cheers to our friend Michael Bloom, and congratulations to him.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
For our friend Michael.
Michael, really, this is just wonderful, Michael. It's just great. It's fun to watch. It's fun to see all the interviews that you've been doing online with people, the press that you're getting, and we were looking forward to seeing where this goes. Do you have any final words before we turn off the recording?
Just a huge thank you. I mean, the feedback that you've given me today is brilliant. And the fact that you're willing to play and enjoy something new doesn't surprise me with this group. And I encourage you to play with your own collections because you can. Because you can. No, I love all of you, and I wish you continued good health and a really wonderful Hanukkah, if you celebrate Hanukkah. Yeah, cheers. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Eric, if you can turn